much for
Okay,
the opportunity.
1 minute, 1 minute. Allow me to record.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm recording.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for having me.
For the interview. Yeah. I've been following your work for a while now, and it has truly been an inspiration to me and all that I'm doing. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
I have so many questions, Doctor. First of all, when talking about the theology of pathological narcissism, you talk about Andre Green's concept, the dead mother. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on this, and why is narcissism linked to the mother or the mother function?
Mm-hmm. It is the mother that is the most crucial in the first 36 months of life. The father has a minimal role. After 36 months of life, the father enters the picture, and the father becomes the main agent of socialization. So the father teaches the child skills, social scripts, sexual scripts, and the father becomes a role model, and so on. But in the initial 36 months of life, it is the mother that by far is the most crucial, especially in the first 18 months, because the mother is the only person the child interacts with on a regular basis. Still, even in Western industrialized society, that is the fact. And because the child defines itself in contradistinction to the mother, the child uses the mother as a way to discover its own boundaries and to form a self, to create or constellate or integrate a sense of self. So the mother is there in a multiplicity of critical functions. Initially, the child identifies mother with the world. The child doesn't see any difference between itself and mother and the world. So there is what used to be called the symbiotic phase. It is through mother that the child gains knowledge of the world, and it is through the mother's gaze that the child realizes its own separateness, which in itself is a major trauma. And then the child separates from the mother initially, and the self begins to form. If the mother fails at any stage of this hypersensitive process, then we have a disruption in the formation of the self. We have severe attachment problems. We have emotional dysregulation. We have cognitive distortions. They are all directly traceable to maternal failure, or what Andre Green calls dead mother. The dead mother is a mother who is emotionally absent, either because she is depressed or because she's narcissistic. It's a mother who is unable to cater to the basic needs of the child, both physical and psychological. So there is neglect and abandonment involved very often. Or the opposite. It's a mother who is overprotective, domineering, a mother who idolizes the child. And because she idolizes the child, she places the child on a pedestal, and she actually does not allow the child to interact with reality or with peers. In both cases, we are talking about mothers who refuse to provide the appropriate feedback, mothers who don't allow the child to create boundaries and to separate from them in a way which is non-threatening. So there are many ways, there are many types of failure and many types of abuse. It is not true that abuse is only physical or verbal or sexual. Abuse can be, as I mentioned, overprotectiveness. Abuse can be when you parentify the child, when you use the child as your own parent. Abuse can be when you instrumentalize the child, when you use the child to realize your own frustrated fantasies and wishes, and so on. So there are many, many ways to abuse the child.
Yeah.
A good mother, or what Donald Winnicott called the good enough mother, is a mother who simultaneously provides a child with acceptance and warmth and compassion and a holding environment, but at the same time encourages the child to walk away, encourages the child to separate and to become an individual, divided from her. So mother pushes the child away, not aggressively, but by rendering herself a secure base, so that the child says to itself, I can walk away from mommy and there will be no punishment for that. There will be no consequences to it. I can explore the world. And it's a mother who supports the child's grandiosity to some extent, because she encourages the child to venture forth, venture out into the environment, and to actually assume autonomy, personal autonomy, independence, and agency, even though the child is only 1.5 years old or 2 years old. There's a lot of grandiosity here, but the mother encourages this. It's not a surprise that the vast majority of mothers fail, actually, because it's a lot to ask for. It's a delicate balancing act. So it's a lot to ask for. And this raises the issue whether children should not be raised by biological mothers, but should be raised by expert mothers. We have an amazing experiment, actually. The kibbutzim in Israel. In the kibbutzim in Israel, a kibbutz is a commune, a communal kind of settlement. So in the kibbutzim, for a few decades, children were not raised with biological parents. Children were raised centrally by expert mothers, expert nannies, psychologists, and so on and so forth. They saw their mothers, the children saw their mothers, even as infants, even as newborn. They saw the mothers once a week for a few hours. And this is a major experiment because it involves well over 100,000 children. And what we discovered is these children are the most functional and most mentally healthy in Israeli society. They constitute the elites. They have much better academic attainments and accomplishments. Their marital life is much more stable. They are much more mentally healthy. And these are 100,000 people who were not raised by biological mothers. It's a very thought-provoking.
That's amazing. Yeah. Yeah. I was also wondering about the different cycles of abuse. You talk about the cycle from narcissistic abuse, but what are the key differences between the cycle of abuse from a narcissist and, for example, a psychopath and a borderline?
Let's start with the easy one. The easy one is a psychopath. A psychopath wants something from you. He wants your money. He wants to have sex with you. He wants you to introduce him to someone. He wants, he wants something from you. Psychopath is goal-focused or goal-oriented. So once the goal is accomplished or attained, the psychopath would walk away. The abuse is utterly instrumental. And therefore, the abuse is limited in time, limited in space, and very laser-focused. The borderline's abuse is reactive. The borderline is highly dysregulated. She has what we call emotional reactivity. And she's triggered frequently by external factors and internal factors. So, for example, she could be triggered by abandonment and rejection, and shame and humiliation, but she could also be triggered by her own anticipation of possible abandonment. It hasn't happened yet, but she would be triggered. Yeah. So there are so many thousands of factors that trigger borderlines. They are volatile, they're explosive. And so the borderline's abuse is a byproduct, is a side effect of internal psychodynamics, internal psychological processes that the borderline has no control over, absolutely no control. We now know that these are associated with brain abnormalities and with hereditary genetic components.
Yeah.
So this is the borderlines abuse, which could be horrible. Borderlines abuse could be shattering and devastating and life transforming. It could end up being broken and damaged by the borderline. And it's all true, but the borderline is out of control, is in many ways, I think, not responsible. You can't say the same about the narcissist. The narcissist abuse is also goal-oriented, and in this sense, the narcissist is highly antisocial. But the goal in the case of the narcissist is self-aggrandizement, or what we call in clinical psychology, self-enhancement. The goal in the case of the narcissist is to buttress and augment a totally inflated, fantastic, counterfactual self-image or self-concept. A piece of fiction, a myth, a personal mythology, personal religion, actually, where the narcissist is God, a deity. And to accomplish this, the narcissist creates what is known as a shared fantasy, first described by Sander in 1989. He creates a shared fantasy, and then he coerces you or entices you, baits you into the shared fantasy. And your role within the shared fantasy is like like a prop in a theater production, or like an actor in a movie. That's your role. And you are supposed to provide the narcissist with what I call the 4 S's. 2 of the 4 S's, actually. You're supposed to provide sex, supply, narcissistic or sadistics. About 2 to 3% of all narcissists are sadists. So they enjoy your pain and discomfort. You're supposed to provide safety. In other words, you're supposed to be there regardless of the egregiousness of the abuse. You're supposed to stick around. You're supposed to be there. So that you're supposed to provide object constancy. And sex, of course. So 2 of the 4 you're supposed to provide. That is your role. And within the shared fantasy, the abuse in the case of narcissists is one major function, and that is to test you, to see how far the narcissist can go and how submissive and subjugated you are. The narcissist exaggerates the abuse, renders it egregious, pushes the envelope all the time, testing you. And if you stick around, then you are a good mother. You're a good maternal figure. The narcissist can trust you. Your love is unconditional. So the narcissist's goal orientation is about preserving the shared fantasy within which the narcissist is a godlike, divine deity entity. So it has nothing to do with psychopathy. A psychopath may come up with a fantasy, and he would use the fantasy to gaslight you. He would use the fantasy to challenge your ability to gauge and evaluate reality, what is known as reality testing. It would impair your reality testing. Gaslighting is therefore a psychopathic behavior, not a narcissistic behavior. And it is part and parcel of the psychopath's highly limited, goal-oriented, laser-focused abuse. The narcissist abuse is much more dangerous because in order to become a figment within the shared fantasy, in order to fit into the shared fantasy, you need to suspend your own existence. You need to disappear into the shared fantasy and reappear inside the shared fantasy as some kind of internal object. The narcissist demands of you to negate yourself, to vanish, to lose your personal autonomy, your independence, your agency, your critical thinking, your friendships, your family, your job, your everything. You are required to vanish. This is a simulation of the symbiotic phase between a baby and his mother, in effect. The whole thing is a recreation of early childhood conflicts. But the price you pay within the narcissist shared fantasy is the ultimate price, because you end up losing yourself. You end up deprived of a core identity. You end up doubting who you are. Whereas with a psychopath, you lose some money, or you have a one-night stand, or whatever, and it pisses you off. You're angry, you're disgusted, but That's the extent of the psychopath's abuse. And with a borderline, she can hurt you a lot, she can damage you, she can break you apart. Yeah, it's all true. But ultimately, you do know, you do realize that she's mentally ill. And there is an element of capacity to forgive. You are able to forgive the borderline. And this ability to forgive restores you somehow. You're not able to forgive the narcissist because we know that narcissists are in total control of their behaviors. We know, for example, that when we change the narcissist environment, the behaviors of the narcissist change dramatically. We know, for example, that narcissists in prison are not narcissistic at all. They're not haughty or arrogant. They're not contemptuous. They're not aggressive. They're nice. They're kind. So they're capable of not being narcissists. In this sense, narcissism is a kind of choice, behavioral choice, you know? So it's difficult to forgive the narcissist. Very difficult for having, you know, hurt you to that extent, for having negated you, eliminated you, in effect. And these are the differences.
Okay, thank you. There's often talk about narcissistic abuse in terms of, for example, the narcissist and the victim that is supposed to be a normal, healthy person, right? But I was wondering, is it possible that a relationship forms between, for example, two narcissists or two people with a different personality disorder? And what would that look like?
It's pretty common, actually.
Yeah.
Narcissists and borderlines are known to form dyads and couples habitually. My late lamented good friend, Joan Lachkar, has written the book about it in 1982, that long ago, the borderline narcissistic couple. So narcissists provide the borderline with a feeling of safety and stability. Now, narcissist is a rock, is a presence, is supremely self-confident, and he interfaces, he positions himself between the borderline and reality. So he becomes the borderline's reality testing or reality interface. On the one hand, and the borderline provides adulation, admiration, idealization, and so on. Narcissist loves it. It's exactly what he expects his partner to provide in the shared fantasy. So they are a perfect fit. That's a common combination. Narcissists team up, especially romantically, only when they are of different types. So overt narcissist is likely could end up with a covert narcissist. But two overt narcissists, two grandiose overt narcissists are unlikely to form a couple. Similarly, a somatic narcissist would team up with a cerebral narcissist. A cerebral narcissist is a narcissist who obtains supply, narcissistic supply, using his intellect, whereas a somatic narcissist obtains supply using his body. So they're a perfect match. The cerebral is asexual, or not asexual, but hyposexual, or non-sexual, not exactly asexual, but non-sexual. Whereas the somatic is hypersexual. So it's a perfect fit. And somatic finds sex outside the couple. And the cerebral has no problem with it because he's not into sex. On the other hand, the somatic benefits from the cerebral's intellect, and the cerebral feels safe and protected with the somatic. There is a vicarious acquisition of narcissistic supply. So a covert narcissist, who is essentially a collapsed narcissist, it's a narcissist who is unable to obtain supply. A covert narcissist would obtain supply through the overt partner. The overt partner is like a hunter. Overt partner goes out there and brings back the bacon, brings back the narcissistic supply to the covert narcissist. So yes, actually, and psychopaths form dyads very frequently, two psychopaths. And they do this as a collaborative project. So psychopaths team up, even in a romantic couple, they team up to do something together because psychopaths are goal-oriented. And that's why we have Bonnie and Clyde.
Okay.
to psychopaths who are into something together, robbery or murder or you name it. So yes, there's very frequent couple or dyad among psychopaths. Much less frequent are dyads or couples that involve same type narcissist or same type psychopath. Or that's extremely rare. Even borderlines, for example, don't form couples with each other. That's extremely rare because a borderline would not provide another borderline with a sense of safety and stability and a secure base. And so it will not last long.
There's also the issue of comorbidity. You often talk about that a person can have a narcissistic personality disorder and also, for example, a borderline personality disorder. So I can only imagine what that looks like. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a delicious combination, I agree. First of all, let us be clear.
Yeah.
These diagnoses, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline, etc., they're limited to North America. They are the outcomes of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is a book whose latest edition, which is the text revision of the 5th edition, 2022, this edition is actually copy-paste of an earlier edition published in the year 2000. 25 years of study and research in any discipline render the knowledge obsolete. So 90% of the information in the DSM is wrong. I'm not exaggerating. It's information from the year 1999 or from the year 1998. It's dead on arrival. It's not used. So DSM is good for insurance and the pharmaceutical industry, but it's not a good diagnostic manual anymore. Although in the 5th edition, there was an attempt to rewrite some of the diagnostic criteria of a few of the personality disorders. So this is known as the alternative models. You have an alternative model for borderline, alternative model for narcissism, and so on. But the problem is much deeper. The problem is that today we believe, it's more or less the mainstream, that there is a single personality disorder. Only one. And that each patient with this single personality disorder emphasizes, accentuates, manifests certain traits. So if you combine these traits in one way, that would be the equivalent of narcissistic personality disorder. If you combine other traits another way, you would have borderline, what used to be borderline. The manual, the diagnostic manual that is used by 80% of humanity is the International Classification of Diseases, the ICD, edition 11, dated 2022. And in the ICD, there is no narcissistic personality disorder. There's no such diagnosis. What the ICD does, the ICD lists traits. These are called trait domains. The ICD has trait domains. And what you do as a clinician or as a diagnostician or as a therapist, when you're confronted with a patient or a client, what you do, you take these trait domains and you combine them to create the exact profile of the person you're facing. It's a Lego approach. These are like Lego bricks. And you take this. So for example, if I would come across a malignant narcissist. A malignant narcissist is a narcissist who is also a psychopath, who is also a sadist. Right. Someone you would like to marry, probably. So if you come across a malignant narcissist with a DSM, you would diagnose him with narcissistic personality disorder, comorbid with antisocial personality disorder, and sadism, although sadism is not in the DSM. Okay. That's one approach. The other approach, if I'm using the ICD, not the DSM, I would identify the traits of this individual. I would see that this individual is dissocial, has dissociality, which is another name for antisocial. I would see that this person is anankastic, has anankastia. In other words, has obsessive compulsive features, I would see that this person is prone to conflict, antagonistic. I would take all these traits and I will combine them and I will create a painting, a picture, clinical picture, unique to this individual. This is a much more flexible, much more realistic, much more helpful approach. Because any clinician would tell you, when you meet someone and they present to you with borderline, 2 days later, they become narcissists. 4 days later, they show a bit of psychopathy. The next week, they're borderline again. And in between, they're histrionic and they're trying to seduce you. So it's clear that these distinctions are totally artificial and they create several massive problems. One of which is comorbidity. It's very common for a patient to be diagnosed with 4, 7, 10 mental health issues. That's a major problem. And the even much bigger problem is what is known as polythetic problem. Polythetic problem is the following. You have 9 criteria to diagnose narcissistic personality disorder. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9. Okay, so here we come. We have 2 patients. Patient number 1 satisfies, meets criteria 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Patient number 2 satisfies criteria 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Both of them are diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, but the only thing they have in common is criterion 5. This is, of course, unsustainable. It's bordering on idiotic, I'm sorry to say. The whole approach is stupid.
Yeah.
This categorical shopping list approach, bullet list, is completely not realistic, counterfactual. People are not lakes. People are rivers. People flow. That's why we say psychodynamics. We don't say psychostatics. Say psychodynamics. It's dynamic. The whole thing is dynamic. There are reactions to internal environment, external environment, and so on. So when you say comorbidity, narcissistic personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder, this uses the categorical approach. This assumes that there are clinical entities which are totally demarcated with differential diagnoses. That's not the case. That's not the case. People with what we used to call borderline personality disorder, now we don't use this term in most of the world, we don't use this term, but okay. People with this disorder, they have, for example, a lot of grandiosity.
Yes.
They are prone to fantasy, exactly like the narcissist. They are, even in classical object relation schools, it is believed that borderlines have a false self, exactly like the narcissist. So the distinctions are very blurry, very murky. And so this comorbidity is, I believe, an artifact, not real. Is an artifact of our flawed, problematic diagnostic system. I believe that you have people who are grandiose, who are antisocial, and who have severe problems regulating certain psychological processes and emotions, cognitions, moods, and so on and so forth. And then it's only a question of measure. We know, for example, that when narcissists are subjected to extreme humiliation, stress, and anxiety, they become borderline. We know that narcissists who are mortified, narcissistic mortification, which is essentially public humiliation and shaming, sudden, unexpected. We know that these narcissists start to emotionally dysregulate and they become suicidal. They become indistinguishable from borderline. We know that the borderline, when you push the borderline, when you humiliate the borderline, when you attack the borderline, we know that the borderline becomes highly psychopathic. Actually, there are studies, scholars that claim that borderline personality disorder has a secondary psychopathic manifestation or phase, and that in this phase, the borderline is reckless. She's aggressive, she's violent, she's acting out, she's a psychopath, she's defiant. So it's all fluid, and every patient who has a personality disorder has all these elements and many more. For example, narcissists and borderlines are also paranoid. They have paranoid ideation. And they have schizoid phases where they avoid reality, avoid the environment. They're schizoid at that moment. So it's all wrong to demarcate. Everyone has everything. Everyone has the potential for it. The only question is your personality functional and relatively organized? If not, then you have everything. You have narcissism, you have psychopathy, you have borderline, you have schizoid, you're paranoid, you're schizotypal, you name it. All is there.
Here, the topic of the malignant narcissist, it's like people really like to talk about that. I was wondering, what would distinguish a malignant narcissist from a classical narcissist? Is it only a matter of sadism and psychopathy? Is there more to be explained there?
A malignant narcissist is someone who uses psychopathic traits and behaviors to obtain supply and to establish and preserve the shared fantasy. In other words, whereas a classical narcissist would use persuasion, charm, superficial charm, would use love bombing, would use language essentially. Classic narcissist would leverage language, basically. The malignant narcissist would try to accomplish exactly the same. Malignant narcissists would want to establish a fantasy, and within the fantasy to obtain supply and be considered grandiose and inflated and so on. But the malignant narcissist would use coercion, aggression, projection of power, threats. He would threaten. So he uses psychopathic methods, psychopathic strategies. He has psychopathic traits and dynamics. He's, for example, defiant, he's reckless, he's contumacious, he hates authority. He would use all this to obtain classical narcissistic goals. Additionally, the malignant narcissist does enjoy inflicting pain on people. He has what phrase that I coined, sadistic supply. He derives narcissistic supply. He is elated, he's euphoric, he feels omnipotent and so on. He derives all this by torturing people, by hurting people. These are the difference. The classic narcissist is not sadistic. That's wrong. That's nonsense online. Classic narcissists are not sadistic. Malignant narcissists are. Psychopaths are very commonly sadistic. And there are, of course, sadists who are not narcissists and not psychopaths. So they're just sadists.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. There's so much information about this that sometimes it gets confusing, but that's perfect. There's also one topic you talk about that really intrigues me. That is the inverted narcissist, because it almost seems contradictory to me, because as I understand it, it shows also codependent traits. So could you explain a little bit about the inverted narcissist?
Yeah, I think the best metaphor is the sun and the moon. The moon has a light, but it's not the moon's light. It's the light of the sun reflected off the moon. So the moon reflects the sun's light. The moon is the inverted narcissist. The inverted narcissist teams up with an overt grandiose narcissist. The overt grandiose narcissist shines. The overt grandiose narcissist obtains attention, adulation, recognition, admiration, and so on. And the inverted narcissist basks in this borrowed vicarious glory. The fact that the overt narcissist obtains supply is her supply. If he becomes famous and she is his wife, for example, then she's the wife of a famous person. It reminds me that in Germany in the 19th century, the wives of doctors, the wives of medical doctors, they were called Frau Doktor. They were not doctors. They could have been, housewives or servants or whatever. But because the husband was a doctor, you had to call her Frau Doktor. Miss Doctor. So this is the inverted narcissist. The inverted narcissist is a combination of codependent and covert narcissist. The inverted narcissist is a narcissist who is unable to obtain supply by herself. I'm saying her because majority of inverted narcissists are women. She's unable to obtain supply by herself because she's shy, socially anxious, or maybe has no skills or gifts. She's simply plain, not to say stupid. She can't obtain supply, whatever the reason may be. Maybe socially it's not acceptable because she's a woman in some societies. She's not allowed to obtain supply. It would be considered ostentatious and immoral, or whatever the reason may be. She cannot obtain supply, but she is a narcissist. So she's in a constant state of collapse. Collapse is when the narcissist cannot obtain supply on a regular basis. So she's in a state of collapse. Collapse is unbearable, intolerable, because it creates a borderline personality organization, borderline-like dynamics in the narcissist. Suicidal ideation, depression, emotional dysregulation. It's unbearable. So what this kind of person does, she teams up with a successful narcissist, a narcissist who is accomplished, a narcissist who can make it. He succeeds, and she's there with him, enjoying his success. And that gratifies her. Because she is dependent totally and crucially on her grandiose overt narcissist, because of this monopoly that her partner has on obtaining supply, she becomes essentially addicted, and that is the codependent element. She becomes dependent on him for the supply. It's like a relationship between junkie and pusher. He provides her with the drugs. She becomes dependent on him for the drugs, and she cannot let him go. She's terrified of abandonment. She's needy. She's clinging. She manipulates him from the bottom. Manipulation, for control from the bottom, is when the codependent uses emotional blackmail, emotional extortion to modify the behaviors of her target or her partner. That's what the inverted narcissist does. So another name for inverted narcissist is narcissist codependent. That's another name for that. So codependent who is a failed, collapsed narcissist and obtains supply through a narcissistic partner. I think you're about to disappear again. Your connection is not very good. Okay, so that's the inverted narcissist. It's something I proposed in 1996. And today it is subsumed under the umbrella term covert narcissist. Covert narcissist is a pretty new development, by the way. For well over 100 years, we described only overt, grandiose narcissists. In the late 80s, there was a group of scholars, Akhtar, Cooper, others, and they came up with the idea of a vulnerable, shy, fragile narcissist. And now it is considered to be one of two major types, the overt grandiose and the covert vulnerable narcissist. Again, this categorization, this constant tendency to classify is good in physics. I have a PhD in physics. It's good in physics, but it's not good in psychology. Because, for example, we know that all narcissists transition between types. Cerebral narcissists become somatic. Overt narcissists become covert. Covert narcissists become overt. There's no type constancy. Why this illusion that we have two types of narcissists? Because in clinical settings, you are likely to come across collapsed narcissists. Only narcissists who fail, narcissists who are unable to obtain supply, they have a crisis, they hit rock bottom, they need you. You're likely, as a clinician, as a therapist, you're likely to meet mainly or only covert narcissists. Whereas academics, they're likely to come across overt, grandiose narcissists. So when an academic speaks to a clinician, the clinician says, narcissists are vulnerable, they're fragile, narcissism is a compensation, it's compensatory. But the academic says, what are you talking about? You're completely wrong. Narcissists are happy-go-lucky, they are self-confident, they are egosyntonic, it's all wrong. And they're arguing, and they don't realize the covert narcissists that went to therapy, used to be an overt narcissist who collapsed. So the collapse mediates the transition between types. It's the same human being, same individual. They just don't realize it because they see it's as if you had two scientists. One of them is observing only larvae, and the other one is observing only butterflies. And then they talk to each other, and the first guy says, all butterflies are round and they look like this. I said, what are you talking about? Butterflies have wings. It's the same entity. The larva, the chrysalis, and the butterfly, they're the same. It's one organism, but different phases, different stages of the life cycle or development. And unfortunately, clinicians don't communicate well with academics and vice versa.
People often say that narcissists don't go to therapy. Is that a myth? Is that a lie?
Depends again on the phase.
Yeah.
A narcissist in principle would not attend therapy because it's not conducive to maintaining the fantasy and the inflated grandiose self-concept. It's admitting not only that something is wrong with you, but it is admitting that you need help. So if you need help, you're not godlike. It challenges the omnipotence. You're not godlike, so very unlikely. However, when the narcissist experiences mortification, humiliation, and shaming, which is abrupt, unpredictable, sudden, when the narcissist hits rock bottom, for example, his wife threatens to divorce him or something, in these situations, narcissists are as likely to attend therapy as anyone else. There are no studies that show that narcissists are more reluctant than psychotics or borderlines or bipolars to attend therapy. It's just the therapy is concentrated in a specific phase of life. All narcissists, without a single exception, go through difficult periods, life crises, collapse, threats, and so on. In these phases, and only in these phases, they are as likely to attend therapy as absolutely anyone else. However, it is true that there is a difference when it comes to narcissists. Whereas healthy people would go to therapy in order to feel better, to function better, to make some changes, to transform themselves and so on, the narcissist would go to therapy to restore his grandiosity and former self. So the narcissist would expect you to be a mechanic. Something's wrong with the car. You have to fix the car, but it should be the same car. Don't dare to change the car. The car is the same. The narcissist says, for example, I always used to get what I wanted. His superficial charm, his magnetism, his charisma. But lately, I keep failing. Could you tell me how to go back to that state that I always got what I wanted? Could you fix me? So it's about fixing, not about transformation. It's about a restoration of the initial state, of the boundary state, not about personal improvement or betterment or.
Okay. You often say that the covert narcissist is worse than the overt. In what way would it be worse? What's the difference, for example, in a relationship?
The covert narcissist is full of rage. It's very, very similar to the borderline. Borderline is a rage disorder. Borderline personality disorder, the anger is disproportionate, inappropriate, and uncontrollable. Same applies to the covert narcissist. The covert narcissist is full, seething with anger, rage, paranoid ideation, all kinds of conspiracy theories, bitterness, resentment. He wants to kill and destroy everything and everyone. And because he is unable to express it in socially acceptable ways, in other words, unable to sublimate this affect, he becomes passive-aggressive. He becomes underhanded. He would sabotage you. He would undermine you. He would poison you, not physically maybe, but he's toxic. You see the overt narcissists coming. The overt narcissists are clowns, basically. they announce their progress. You see them coming, and they're pretty straightforward about what they expect from you, because they believe that they are entitled to whatever it is that they are demanding from you. They demand certain things, and they think you should give it to them. It's your fault if you don't. You should be punished if you don't. But it's all straightforward. We call it in philosophy overt text. The text is overt. It's an open text. You don't have to deconstruct the text. There's nothing underneath. It's what you see is what you get. That's absolutely not the case with the covert narcissist. The text, in this case, is hidden. And not only don't you have access to the text, but you are punished. You're punished because you don't have access to the text. So the covert narcissist denies you access to who he truly is, what he really wants, how his fantasies, his dreams. He denies you access to all this because it's humiliating to admit that you're a constant failure. He denies you access to this. Then he reframes reality. He says, I didn't get a promotion at work because my colleagues envy me and they conspire against me. So he creates these paranoid conspiracy theories within which you fit. You're part of them. And then he punishes you and you don't know why. You have no idea why. He punishes you, and he doesn't even punish you openly. It's not a negotiating process, a bargaining process. He doesn't come and say, listen, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, and I'm going to punish you. It comes out of nowhere. It's surreptitious, it's hidden, it's subtle. You can't prove it in most cases. So this is really bad. It's like slow motion toxicity. Slow motion toxicity, and there's no end to it. The covert narcissist in principle can become overt if the circumstances change and the environment changes. So a covert can transition from one environment to another, and when he transitions to the other environment, he becomes overt. We saw it in colonialism, where white people who were scum, they were criminals and garbage, the trash of society. When they emigrated to Africa, they became masters. They became suddenly, the elite. This trash, human trash, became the elite. So you see a situation where covert narcissists, when they change environment, can become overt narcissists. Okay. So this happens. But as long as the covert is embedded in his environment, for example, in his family, with his workplace and so on, they will do everything in their power to punish you by destroying you and everything you care for, everything you hold dear, everything you love. It's sabotage. Simply, the most fitting word is sabotage.
There's also the matter of decompensation. Sometimes you say that when a narcissist decompensates, he becomes a primary psychopath. And also that happens or can happen for the borderline or even for the psychopath. How do you explain that process? What happens there?
That's just a minor correction. When an overt narcissist decompensates, he becomes a borderline.
Okay.
And when a covert narcissist compensates, he becomes a primary psychopath.
Okay.
Which is another reason why covert narcissists are much more dangerous. Decompensation is a theorized concept. We didn't measure, we never captured decompensation in laboratory, but it's a theoretical construct, theoretical dynamic, where a person is subjected to enormous stress, anxiety and tension, challenges and crises and so on, and it becomes overwhelming. The person's capacity to cope is overwhelmed. The person basically shuts down, and initially by shutting down defense mechanisms. Because psychological defense mechanisms are the interface between us and the world. That's why most psychological defense mechanisms are ego functions. They're functions of the ego. Because the ego is the interface. The ego interacts with reality, mediates reality in Freud's work, of course. Yeah. These are metaphors, let it be clear. There's no such thing as ego or superego. These are metaphors, but useful metaphors. I find them useful. So there is something that interacts with reality. Why not call it ego? Yeah? And the functions of the ego, many of them are known as defense mechanisms. So the ego shuts down because reality becomes intolerable, unbearable. The ego is deactivated, disabled, because the ego is in touch with reality and keeps bringing pain, keeps bringing frustration. The more you interact with reality, the more unhappy you are, the more hurt you are, the more. So you stop, you cut yourself off reality. The only way to do this, you disable the ego, like turning a key in the switch, disable the ego, and all the functions stop. And most of the defense mechanisms stop. This is called decompensation. Now, when you decompensate, you still have to function and you still have to interact with reality, but you cannot continue to interact with reality the way you were because it didn't work. The way you were proved to be dysfunctional, problematic, painful. So you cannot continue the same way. What you do instead, you adopt another self-state. This is the work of Philip Bromberg. You adopt another self-state. And in the case of, for example, the overt narcissist, the grandiose narcissist, the grandiose narcissism is decompensated, disabled, and what is left behind is a borderline. Otto Kernberg, who is the father of the field, suggested that pathological narcissism is a defense against a borderline personality organization. So initially there's borderline, and it's painful, it's dysregulated, it's horrible, it's volatile, it's terrifying, and the individual, a child actually, creates pathological narcissism, which is a kind of a primitive religion with the divinity, the false self, imaginary friend, if you wish. And they protect against the borderline dynamics. But when you take away the narcissism, what is left? The borderline dynamics. So when you take away the narcissism, exposed is the borderline behind, like the Wizard of Oz. Exposed. Similarly, in covert narcissism, the covert narcissist is passive-aggressive, defiant, contumacious, hates authority. And so if you take away the covert side, the acting, if you wish, the pretensions, the faking, if you take that away in the compensation process, what's left behind is the aggression. Unbridled, undisguised aggression. When the covert is covert, the aggression is passive aggression. But when you take away the covert side, the covert camouflage, what is left is just the aggression. Aggression is a good definition of psychopathy.
Okay.
So you have a psychopath, and so on and so forth. Every personality disorder has a post-collapse, post-decompensation manifestation, which is another personality disorder. I actually gave a lecture I gave a lecture a few years ago, I'm sorry, in McGill University. Not a lecture, a colloquium. I gave a colloquium in McGill University, and I proposed a periodic table, like Mendeleev, you know, the periodic table of personality disorders, so that each personality disorder transitions to another personality disorder when there's a collapse, when there is a crisis, when there is decompensation. There is transition from this personality disorder to this, and from this to this, exactly like the elements in nature. So that's more or less the picture.
Okay, thank you so much.
One last thing.
Yes.
I'm sorry, just to. So in my model, all personality disorders come in pairs. Not one, but always two. Always two. So that the second one is the default of the first one in case of collapse. Narcissism comes with borderline. Covert narcissism with psychopathy. Psychopathy with narcissism. When the psychopath collapses, he becomes narcissist. He becomes grandiose. He develops a fantasy. We see it a lot in prisons. When psychopaths are challenged or humiliated and so on, they become extreme narcissists. They are super grandiose. They are godlike. They are. So in my theory, there are pairs of personality disorder, dyads. or duality of personality disorders. You don't have a single one
Okay.
ever. But always there is a fallback option, a default option. In case you fail with the primary, you have the secondary.
That makes so much sense. Okay. Doctor, we are 1 hour in. I don't know if you have time for a couple more questions.
Yes, with pleasure.
Yes?
Call me
Okay.
Sam. Call me Sam.
Okay, thank you, Sam. I understand that narcissistic personality disorder is not treatable, but I was wondering about what happens with a narcissistic style. Is there hope for people that have a narcissistic style?
Well, there's two questions actually. Narcissistic, yeah, narcissistic personality disorder is not treatable, but narcissistic behaviors can be modified.
Mhm.
We have had a lot of success with specific treatment modalities, including schema therapy and so on, transactional analysis and so on. We've had a lot of success with 10, 15 treatment modalities in modifying narcissistic behaviors. When you give the narcissist the right incentive, the narcissist is very likely to alter, modify behaviors, although the behavior modification never persists, and you need to do it all over again. It's Sisyphean, again and again, But still you can. Let me give you a simple example. You can leverage the narcissist's grandiosity in order to induce behavior modification in the narcissist. For example, you can tell the narcissist, I don't believe you can do that. Even you, I don't think you can do that. And just to prove to you how wrong you are and he is capable of doing it, he will change his behavior. So narcissists are children. These are people whose mental age is 2, 3 years old. And so it's easy to manipulate them. Narcissists are very gullible, very manipulable. So in therapy, you can modify behaviors, but you cannot touch the core.
Okay.
I keep saying, we call it narcissistic personality disorder.
Yeah.
The only way to fix it is to get rid of the personality. Can you ever do that? We still don't know how to do that. What is it? Personality implant. What exactly are you going to do? Personality surgery. It's nonsense. The personality, by definition, is who you are. So if who you are is disordered, you're disordered for life. End of story. You can, of course, modify behaviors. You can even modify certain dynamics. For example, dialectical behavior therapy has had success in modifying certain borderline personality disorder dynamics. So yeah, you can, but it's limited, very limited. With regards to narcissistic style is simply a set of behaviors and traits that are subclinical. In other words, they don't amount to a clinical diagnosis. So these are people who are obnoxious, exploitative, disempathic, insensitive, hyper vigilant, hypersensitive to criticism, aggressive, and so on and so forth. And therapy or intervention treatment modalities of this and that kind can definitely be very useful and helpful in this. So, for example, in anger management classes, we come across many narcissists and psychopaths. Their proportion in anger management classes is much higher than in the general population. And yet, anger management is very successful. It's one of the most successful interventions in clinical psychology. DBT is very successful. So we know that if you are dealing with a person who has only narcissistic style, this person doesn't have the impediments and obstacles to change. In narcissistic personality disorder, you don't have a functioning self because the formation of the self was disrupted in early childhood. You have an insecure attachment style, severely insecure attachment style. You have an inability to tell the difference between external and internal objects. You're psychotic in this sense. That's not Sam Vaknin, that's Otto Kernberg. The damage is severe, severe. You don't have any of this in people with narcissistic style. They have a functioning self. They can tell the difference between reality and fantasy. They can tell the difference between external and internal. They know exactly what they're doing. They know the consequences of what they're doing. They know why they're doing what they're doing. It's much easier to work with them. Much easier to work with them. They don't reframe all the time. They don't subject everything to the fantasy. They don't coerce. They coerce, but it's not an integral part of the fantasy. So it's much easier to work with them. I think the critical key to success with these people is the fact that they're grounded in reality. When you're grounded in reality, the clinician can construct a system of incentives which would yield behavior modification. When you're not grounded in reality and you have to work from within the fantasy, it's a major problem because the fantasy usually is self-defeating and self-destructive by definition because it's divorced from reality. How self-efficacious can you be? You can't be efficacious when you're divorced from reality. Self-defeating. So when you collaborate as a clinician with a narcissist fantasy, you're actually collaborating or colluding with his own self-destruction. There's an ethical, moral dilemma here. Do you continue to pretend that the fantasy is real? Is when you do, as a clinician, you are lying to your patient. But on the other hand, if you confront the fantasy head on, nothing good will come out of it. So narcissists are untreatable. Whereas people with narcissistic style, absolutely treatable with very good prognosis.
Okay. Some people try to go to couple therapy to sort of save the relationship. Would this be beneficial in any sense?
You can, as I said, you can modify the narcissist behaviors. If he has abrasive behaviors, unpleasant, aggressive behaviors, antisocial behaviors, you can modify all these, make life easier with a narcissist in a couple, of course. But it will be short term. Let's say 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. 6 months is a major accomplishment. And you have to come back to couple therapy every few months for maintenance sessions. And you never know when the narcissist is going to come up with a new fantasy because fantasies are not fixed. People think that the shared fantasies are fixed. It's not fixed at all. It's an evolving narrative. It's reminiscent of a soap opera. There's always a new chapter with something, So a behavior modification which was induced by one fantasy could completely disappear once there's a new fantasy. I'll give you an example. In the initial phase of the shared fantasy, the narcissist idealizes the intimate partner. The narcissist creates an image of the intimate partner as a perfect being. She can do no wrong. She is drop-dead gorgeous. She is hyper-intelligent. She's unprecedented. She's amazing. She's fascinating. So using these, we can modify the narcissist behavior. But then later in the shared fantasy, the narcissist devalues the intimate partner. Suddenly, she's an enemy, stupid, ugly, can do no right, etc. And as you can imagine, owing to the change in perception of the intimate partner, all the accomplishments of the initial couple therapy disappear. Because now the narcissist has an incentive to misbehave. All the agreements, all the therapeutic alliances, all the contracts, all the communication protocols, you can throw it to the garbage because the intimate partner has changed as far as a narcissist is concerned. When you talk to the narcissist and says, listen, we had an agreement that you will never do this again. Why did you do this? He would say, because she changed. She's no longer the same person. She's now my enemy. She's conspiring against me. She's hostile. So it's a Sisyphean effort in the sense that every 2 months you have to sit with a narcissist and reinvent the wheel. And maybe it's going to work. Maybe it's not going to work. There's no couple with a narcissist, so there's no couple therapy. The narcissist is not in a couple. You're not the narcissist's intimate partner. Narcissists don't do intimacy and they don't do partnership. You are the narcissist's insignificant other. You're a service provider. You're a service provider, and your main service is to preserve the fantasy and buttress it and support it. And it is up to the narcissist to rewrite and reframe the fantasy. Actually, the fantasy is a life of its own, but it's happening in the narcissist's mind. So it's out of your hands. You know, I listen to victims saying, if I only had done this, if I only didn't do this, if I only behaved this, it's nonsense. The fantasy controls the narcissist. It's an inexorable machinery set in motion by a trigger. And from that moment on, there's nothing you can do and nothing he can do, and definitely nothing a clinician can do.
So some victims get out of the relationship thinking they are the narcissist. How would you explain that? What happens there?
They're possibly right, because narcissism is contagious, and the narcissist triggers in you, exposure to narcissism triggers in you narcissistic defenses, a reduction in empathy, psychopathic behaviors. So you become much more aggressive, much less empathic, much less compassionate, much more conniving and conspiring and scheming, much more narcissist. So yeah, you spend 10 years with a narcissist, the only way to survive is to out-narcissize the narcissist. There's no other way. If you continue to be nice and kind and pleasant and empathic and so on, your life expectancy will be considerably shortened. Trust me. So yes, there is influence, there is contagion, and the suspicion, the feeling that victims have that they have lost their erstwhile identity, their previous identity. They say, I don't recognize myself. I don't believe I've done this. I can't believe I've done this. They're shocked. They're shocked because they've acquired a new identity. It's a process known as entrainment. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's actually a branch in neuroscience. Entrainment is the use of repetitive rhythmical sounds to induce a synchronization of two or more brains. The narcissist's verbal abuse is usually very rhythmic, very repetitive, very reminiscent of a liturgy or a prayer, like a mantra. If you record a narcissist over the years, you see that it's very much like a mantra. So it induces some kind of synchronization of the brains, control, brainwashing, entrainment. He changes you, is what I'm trying to say. The narcissist changes you. He also installs in your mind an app. He puts inside your mind an introject, a voice that keeps talking to you long after the narcissist is physically gone, long after the narcissist is out of your life. That voice is with you. Introjection. It's an introject. Exactly like your mother, your father did to you. It's normal. Introjection is a normal, healthy, adaptive, good process. But the narcissist abuses this process to install in your mind a controlling, harshly criticizing, mildly sadistic voice that puts you down, takes you down. So the only defense against all these panoplies of techniques is to become resilient, to become hard, to harden yourself, become hard, not soft, to become aggressive, to push back, to not be so empathic. If you empathize with the narcissist, it's a weakness, it's a vulnerability. He will take advantage of it. So you lose your empathy. You can't, by the way, people think they can disable empathy with one person and remain empathic with others. No, it's an extensive trait. If you reduce empathy with one person, you find that you have lost your empathy with everyone else. That is what happens to soldiers. When soldiers go to war, they say, I'm going to be disempathic only with the enemy. Then they come back home and they kill someone because it's an extensive property. So narcissists, I keep saying that narcissism is a religion for various reasons. The false self is a lot like God, and the narcissist worships the false self and merges with the false self. But there's another aspect. Narcissism, exactly like religion, converts people. It's missionary. The narcissist tries to convert you to the new cult, to the new religion. It tries to make you a believer. That it's a faith. And so gradually, it's exactly like cult. It's a cult. So you become a cult member. And you know, when people leave cults or when they're taken out of cults by force, you have to deprogram them. There's debriefing, there's deprogramming. It's a long process.
Yeah, I got just one more question. That was what I was going to ask you. Um, it's about healing from this process, right? You often talk about things like silencing the narcissist voice or concepts like embodying, working with the body. Is there anything else people that are going through prolonged grief, for example, can do for healing?
I will answer in a strange way. First of all, on my YouTube channel,
Yeah,
there is a playlist. It's titled Narcissistic Abuse, Healing and Recovery. It contains well over 100 videos. I think about 300 or 400 hours. It is structured like a course, like a,
okay.
no, like, so you watch the first, then you watch the second, you watch the third, it leads you, and so on. Another thing is that on May 22nd, between May
Yeah,
22nd and May 25th, I'm having a 3 days free, completely free seminar in Skopje, the beautiful capital of North Macedonia.
mm,
Everyone is invited, and the seminar deals with evidence-based, scientific or science-based healing and recovery from narcissistic abuse. So rather than go through everything, go to
okay.
the playlist, watch the videos, and
Yeah,
if you're so inclined, you can afford it and you have time, come to the seminar. You're very welcome, and it's free. No, and spend 3 days, 3.5 days actually, learning all the what modern science has to say, neuroscience and so on. So there would be in the seminar material that is actually not available on the playlist because after
mm,
all, there are limitations to what I can do on YouTube. So the seminar is a bit more grounded in science and a bit more um, academic, I can say.
okay.
But we have a pretty good idea how to work with victims of abuse and narcissistic abuse, and the prognosis is very good. However, it might prove to be a long process, and you may have to go through very difficult times.
Mm.
So there's good news and bad news. You're not,
Dr. Sam,
you're not the same person.
what?
You're not the same
Yeah.
person. You've been
Mhm,
exposed to a force of nature. You've been exposed to something. Religious people call it evil. So you have
mm,
you have Scott Peck, and you have Jordan Peterson, and they use the word evil. We don't use the word evil in clinical psychology. People say possession or demons because they don't have any other words, they don't have any other vocabulary or language.
mhm,
It's a rough, tough, possibly the worst imaginable type of abuse. That's why
mm,
I gave it a new name. I coined the phrase narcissistic abuse because I thought that it stands apart from all other types of abuse.
mhm,
And so you can't expect to go through something like this and then in 3 days of therapy or with 2 pills to fully recover and heal and go happy, smiling. And you can't expect this. If you
mhm.
have lived with a narcissist for a year, probably you would need a year. If you've lived with a narcissist for 10 years, you may need 10 years.
Okay.
But rest assured, you will not be the same person ever again.
Mhm.
But you will recover, you will be functional, you will be happy, and you will heal. This is what the statistics show. I've been doing this for 30 years, so
Yeah.
I think I know what I'm talking about.
Sam, thank you so much for your time,
Thank you for the
for
opportunity.
your insight and the information. It's been a pleasure having this
Mine as well.
conversation with
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. You're in Peru, aren't you?
Yeah, yeah, I am Peru.
In Lima?
Yes. I'm in Cusco right now,
Ah,
in the
Cusco?
Sacred Valley.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you.